Welcome, dreamers. Tonight, on Sleep Stories' Restless Minds, we invite you to step quietly into a snowy world, soft with silence, steeped in time, and full of gentle magic. The Snowkeeper's Almanac is a cozy, wandering tale about Calder, a quiet soul walking through a winter that remembers everything. Lanterns glow with memory, bridges whisper with names, and time itself folds softly around him. This is a journey through snow, through stillness, and through the hours we carry with us, told slowly with intention in a soothing voice made for sleep. So settle in, dim the lights, let your thoughts wander, and let the snow guide you home. Now let's begin. Part 1, The Hour That Fell from the Sky. It had snowed for 3 days without pause. Not a storm, not a flurry, just a steady, hushed falling, the kind that turned time to butter and sound to wool. Calder didn't mind. The snow was an old friend, and the woods outside his cabin in Whiteroot Hollow were more memory than wilderness now. He sat in his favorite chair, the one by the window, with a cup of cinnamon tea and a thick wool blanket draped across his knees. The fireplace crackled softly, popping now and then like it was trying to tell him a story it had nearly forgotten. The cabin was small, but every shelf held comfort books with soft covers, glass jars filled with dried herbs and story dust, and a peculiar object he'd found long ago, a silver timepiece with no hands, just a slow pulse in its center. He called it the hourglass heart. He didn't know where it had come from, only that it hummed quietly when the snow fell, and that it had been doing so more insistently this morning. Calder reached for it. As soon as his fingers brushed the surface, the hum turned into something more, a warmth that spread through his chest, not from the fire, but from something deeper. The snow outside stopped mid-fall. Not drifted, not slowed. Stopped. Calder blinked, stood, set the timepiece on the table. It pulsed again once, then split open like a clock flower. Inside was a map drawn in shifting snow and frost ink. It pointed not to a place, but to a time. The words shimmered softly, to the hour that was misplaced. Begin where the candle first forgot its flame. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't need to. The scarf by the door wrapped itself around his neck. His coat, stitched with stardust buttons, felt warmer than usual. The door opened with a sigh, and Calder stepped out into the snow. Part 2, The Candle's First Flame. The path through the woods felt familiar, even though it shifted as Calder walked. The trees here grew tall and heavy, their trunks thick with frost, and their branches bending with the weight of centuries. It was quiet, no birds, no wind, just the sound of his boots crunching through the thick blanket of snow. The map in his mind was clear, though not direct. It led him toward the heart of the forest, where the oldest trees stood like ancient guardians, their roots curling beneath the earth like sleeping serpents. The air was cold but not bitter. It carried a sense of patience, as if the snow and the world were content to take their time. As he walked, he passed a small clearing he had visited many times before. In the center of it stood a solitary ancient candle, taller than a man, its wick flickering with pale blue light. Calder paused, his gaze fixed on the soft glow. The candle had always been there, in the same spot, but today it looked different. The flame, though small, pulsed as if it had a life of its own. He stepped closer. The light flickered brighter for a moment before dimming, and the scent of beeswax filled the air, sweet, comforting, and strangely familiar. "Is this where it began?" Calder murmured to the candle, though it had no answer. His hand hovered just above the flame, careful not to touch. He knew, somehow, that it was never meant to burn brightly, but only to remember. A gentle snowflake drifted from the sky and landed on the wick. It sizzled for a moment before disappearing completely, as if swallowed by the candle's soft light. At that moment, the snow around him began to swirl in a gentle circle, as if the air itself had remembered its motion. The map in his mind shifted again, guiding him forward, toward the deeper woods, where time itself seemed to stand still, or perhaps move in a way Calder had never fully understood. He turned away from the candle and continued walking, following the path that only he could see. Part 3, The Clock Tree Grove. The path narrowed as Calder walked deeper into the forest. The trees grew closer together now, their limbs knotted with old frost, bark thick with rings that shimmered faintly under the snow. These trees he knew were not ordinary. They were clock trees, ancient, time-bound, and rooted not just in the soil but in memory. The air around them buzzed softly with ticking, not loud, not even rhythmic, just quiet like the breath of old thoughts. As Calder entered the grove, the wind stilled entirely. Snowflakes hung suspended like they'd forgotten how to fall. Each tree here had a small wooden dial embedded in its trunk. Some were cracked, others whole. None moved. Calder walked between them with reverence, brushing his gloved fingers gently along the closest dial. Tick. Just once. A single deep tick echoed through the grove. He turned. The tree behind him had shifted. The snow at its base cleared slowly, revealing a stone bench with a cushion of moss, still warm, as if someone had only recently left. He sat, and as soon as he did, the snow began to fall again, but only in the grove. It came down in slow, spiraling flakes that sparkled faintly. Each flake seemed to carry something inside it, not images, but impressions. The warmth of bread just out of the oven, the echo of a lullaby, the first time a name was spoken aloud and meant something more than sound. Calder closed his eyes and let the memories drift through him. He saw a boy with frost in his hair chasing fireflies in winter. A cottage window lit from within, a woman humming softly to herself as she stirred a pot of something that smelled like memory. A younger version of himself holding the hand of someone he hadn't thought of in years. When he opened his eyes, the ticking was louder, not urgent, but present. One of the tree's dials now spun slowly, not clockwise, not counterclockwise, just turning. Beneath it, carved in the bark, was a line of faint words. What once was watched still watches. He stood. The map shifted again. The next place was calling, not with sound, but with pull. He left the grove, not with haste, but with purpose. The snow fell heavier now, not threatening, but full, thick with time and something else. Something waiting. Part 4, The Cabin Beneath the Frost. The snowfall deepened as Calder left the grove behind. The trees opened just enough to let the sky in, an endless wash of soft gray light that never truly brightened or dimmed. The snow beneath his boots was plush and silent, like walking on half-formed thoughts. The map in his mind pulsed gently, not in a direction, but in a feeling, a warmth that tugged at his memory, a scent he couldn't name, a shape remembered by the heart, but not the eye. And then he saw it. Half buried in a low hollow was a cabin, small and round with a roof sloped like a snowdrift. It looked abandoned, but the smoke curling gently from the crooked chimney suggested otherwise. He stepped closer, and the snow fell in softer patterns here, slow, circular, protective. The door creaked open on its own. He stepped inside. The interior was dim and smelled of cedar and cinnamon bark. Dust floated in shafts of light cast through warped glass windows. A single chair sat by the fire. A quilt was folded neatly at its side, but it was the clock on the mantel that held him still. It was his, or rather it had been. The same clock that used to sit on his childhood windowsill, back when time had meant little more than the stretch between tea and sleep. He hadn't seen it in decades, and yet here it was, still ticking, still glowing faintly. Calder approached, and the clock's ticking stopped. Then a voice, low, kind, familiar. "Ah, you've come." From the back corner of the cabin, a figure stepped forward. He was old but not fragile. He wore a coat made of quilted snowflakes and eyes full of winters. Calder recognized him at once. It was himself, but not from before, from after. Older, calmer, still. The older Calder smiled, then walked past him and opened a cupboard. From it, he pulled 2 cups and a kettle already steaming. "You're not lost," he said, pouring tea. "You're just early." They sat in silence for a long while, sipping. The room held the kind of quiet that knew how to wait. Finally, Calder asked, "Why show me this now?" The older version of himself nodded toward the fire. "Because time isn't ahead of you. It's around you. You're not walking forward. You're unfolding." The words settled in his chest like snow on stone. He didn't need to understand them fully. Not yet. Outside, the snow fell more lightly now. The weight had shifted. When he stood to leave, The older version of himself offered a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For the next hour," he said, "you'll know when to open it." Calder took it gently, bowed in thanks, and stepped once more into the snow. Part 5, the Snowglass Watchtower. The air beyond the cabin had changed. It was quieter now, not in sound, but in stillness. The kind of stillness that arrives only after something important has passed and something equally important is about to begin. Calder walked slowly. The bundle from his older self remained tucked beneath his arm, radiating a subtle warmth. Not heat, but familiarity. The map in his thoughts no longer whispered in directions. Instead, it offered a single phrase, etched like frost along the inside of his mind. "Look where you've already been." And so he did. The trail behind him was almost erased. Snowfall had hidden it well, but he could still feel the impressions of his steps. The candle, the clock trees, the bench, the voice, they all lived inside him now. Ahead, nestled at the peak of a long snow-covered slope, stood a tall, slender tower made entirely of snowglass, a clear, crystalline structure that shimmered like the frozen surface of a forgotten lake. It pulsed faintly with inner light. He climbed the hill slowly, breathing in rhythm with the wind. It no longer chilled him. It moved through him. At the door of the tower was no lock, only an indentation shaped like a handprint, already filled with gently falling snow. He placed his hand over it. The tower hummed. The door swung open. Inside, spiral stairs wound upward around a hollow center filled with snowlight, drifting slowly like reversed snowfall, upward instead of down. He climbed. Each step felt softer, as though time here was cushioning his journey. The walls glowed faintly, showing flickers of images from his life, not scenes, but impressions, the warmth of a fire, the sting of goodbye, the feeling of snow melting in his palm the first time he saw winter. At the top of the stairs was a single room, round, glass-paned, and filled with light from the snow clouds outside. At its center a pedestal stood, upon it a shallow basin of snow. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a key, small, silver, and dusted with frost. He placed it into the center of the basin. The snow in the bowl began to swirl. A vision rose, not vivid, not loud, just present. A cottage at the edge of a frozen lake. Lanterns hanging from the trees. Someone waiting at the door. The sense that he had been there before, or might be one day. Not a memory, not a prophecy. A possibility. And a voice not from outside, but within. Not all places we remember have happened yet. The basin quieted. The room grew warm. Calder sat by the round window, looking out across the hollow. Snow still fell. But it didn't hide anything anymore. It revealed Part 6, the memory below the ice. Calder descended the tower slowly, each step echoing like a page being turned in a very old book. The snow glass glowed gently behind him, and as he stepped once more into the winter air, the light from the tower didn't fade. It followed him, tucked now into the rhythm of his breath. The wind had changed direction, curling through the pine trees with a sound like slow-turning gears. The hollow was guiding him now, not with urgency but with subtle weight, like the pull of an old dream remembered too clearly. Ahead, a frozen lake stretched wide and still. It gleamed under the pale sky like a sheet of opal, its surface unbroken save for a single circular opening at the edge, surrounded by lanterns sunk deep into snow. The opening was perfectly shaped, round, dark, still. It was not made by hand. It was kept. Calder approached, and a soft bell rang from beneath the ice. Not a warning, an invitation. He knelt at the edge, peering into the dark water. Beneath the surface drifted pale shapes, faint, blurred by the deep fragments of thought, echoes of feelings. One floated upward, just near the surface, a small wooden toy boat. He knew it instantly. It had been his, long ago, left at the water's edge on a day when the snow fell sideways, and time had felt like something large and lonely. He had cried then, not from loss, but from not knowing how to name the ache of forgetting. The boat drifted in a lazy circle untouched by current. Then another shape approached, a ribbon, soft blue tied in a loop. Calder didn't recognize it, not with his mind, but something in his chest softened. The water was not cold, not really. It shimmered with memory, not temperature. He leaned closer. Beneath the surface, just far enough to blur, he saw himself again, not as he was, nor as he'd been, but as someone remembering. Sitting by the lake, laughing, waiting, writing something in the frost. The version beneath the water looked up and smiled, not with recognition, but with trust. Calder dipped his fingers into the water. The chill was gentle. The lake pulsed once, and the lanterns around him flickered. A sound, not quite a voice, rose through the wind. Some memories wait until we're ready to remember them. He stood. The water stilled again. The ribbon floated down. The toy boat turned one last slow circle and vanished into the dark. Snow began to fall again, thicker this time, like a blanket being pulled close. Calder turned back to the path. The hollow had more to show him. But now he carried not just time, he carried warmth. Part 7, The Bells of the Halloween Chapel. The snow grew softer as Calder walked away from the lake. It clung to his coat and lashes, not with cold, but with kindness. Each flake felt deliberate, like a thought landing gently on his shoulders. The trees thinned once more, giving way to a low hill, its sides rounded with years of snowfall. At its crest sat a chapel, small, squat, and made of dark wood that creaked gently under the weight of its own age. A steeple rose above it, wrapped in strands of ice silk, and hanging from that steeple were a dozen silver bells. None of them moved. None of them needed to. This was the Halloween Chapel, a place Calder had only heard about in whispers and lullabies. A chapel not built for worship, but for pausing, for remembering all that had passed unnoticed. He stepped through the arched wooden doorway, ducking slightly. Inside, the chapel was warm, not from fire but from presence. There were no pews, only cushions scattered across the floor, each in its own little patch of light from the stained glass windows. The windows depicted no saints or stories, just slow things, snow falling on moss, a candle flickering beside an unread book, a scarf left hanging on a fence post in early spring. At the far end of the chapel stood a bell pull, long and wound with winterberries. Calder walked to it and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but eventually something within him settled, a breath, a softening. He reached out and rang the bell. The sound was not loud. It was low, resonant, like a memory being exhaled. It filled the chapel and then drifted out through the windows, curling into the snow, the sky, the hollow itself. It didn't ask for anything. It simply was. And then the other bells began to chime. Not all at once, not in harmony, but together, somehow, each one releasing a small personal sound like sighs given shape. They rang for things never said, for partings that had no ceremony, for moments that were too soft to hold on to. Calder stood still as the sound washed through him. Then silence returned, not empty but full. In the quiet, he noticed a slip of parchment resting on the windowsill nearest him. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up. Written in faint ink were the words, "The softest parts of time are the ones we carry longest." He folded the parchment gently and tucked it into his coat pocket. When he stepped outside, the bells no longer rang, but he could still hear them, far beneath the snow and thought. And so he continued into the hush, into the white, into whatever moment waited next. Part 8, The Hearth Between Winters. The trail curved away from the chapel and into a thick wood, where the trees bent overhead like archways in a cathedral of snow. Icicles hung like wind chimes, still and gleaming. No breeze stirred here, but the air was not stagnant, it was waiting. As Calder moved through the quiet, he felt time begin to thin again. Not stretch or slow, but settle, like flour through a sieve. It was subtle, kinned, familiar. Then, in the clearing ahead, he saw it. A hearth. No cabin around it. No walls, no roof. Just a stone hearth, freestanding in the middle of the snowy forest, glowing with a small, steady fire. And beside it an armchair. Empty. The flames were low, ember orange, and whispering. The hearthstone was ringed in carvings, small sigils and faint words that shimmered when looked at sideways. Calder stepped closer. The warmth was unlike anything he'd felt in the hollow so far. It wasn't the heat of wood burning. It was the warmth of shared silence. The feeling of arriving before you're expected, but being welcomed all the same. He sat in the armchair. It sighed softly beneath him. Across from the fire sat another chair, but not empty. A figure occupied it. Not clear, not solid, but shaped from smoke and flicker light. Not ghostly, just present. The figure leaned forward slightly. Their face was indistinct, but their posture was familiar. Calder realized it was not someone else. It was him, from a winter that hadn't happened yet. The other Calder smiled, not in greeting but in understanding, as if to say, yes, we get here eventually. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. The fire popped gently and the wind circled the clearing in a slow dance. The snow above didn't fall, it drifted, weightless, watching. Then the future Calder stood, leaving behind a small object on the hearthstone, a key made of snow glass, cold to the touch, but glowing faintly at its core. And just like that, the image faded. The fire stayed. Calder picked up the key and held it gently in his hands. Etched into its side were 4 words. For the door you forgot. He tucked it into his coat. The snow parted slightly, revealing a path that hadn't been there before. It curved upward, into a ridge brushed with moonlight. The fire crackled once more behind him as he rose. And onward he walked, through memory, through snow, through time that felt more like feeling than hours. Part 9, the door without a frame. The path that opened from the hearth was narrow and sloped gently upward, bordered by trees that leaned just enough to make Calder feel as if he were walking through a passage that had never been named. The snow here was lighter, falling in thin silver ribbons that vanished before touching the ground. He held the snowglass key in his gloved hand. It pulsed faintly with a rhythm he couldn't match to any clock. It beat like a slow drum, not of urgency but of presence. At the top of the ridge, the trees parted once more, revealing a windswept plateau dusted with frost. In the center of it stood a door. No frame. No hinges. Just a single wooden door standing upright in the snow. It didn't lean. It didn't shiver. It simply was. Carved into its surface, worn by time but still clear, were the words, "What you locked away still remembers the shape of your hand." Calder stepped forward and slowly reached into his coat. He withdrew the key. As he brought it near the door, the snow around the plateau stilled. Even the wind paused, listening. He inserted the key into a small invisible lock. It turned with a soft click. The door opened. Inside there was no room, just space. A memory suspended in snowlight. He stepped through, and suddenly he was elsewhere, not truly gone, but dislodged from the moment. It was the inside of a house he had once known, a winter home long ago, filled with candlelight and the smell of bread rising in the oven. He could hear laughter in another room. A dog's tail thumping softly on the floor, the soft whisper of someone humming in the kitchen. He walked slowly across the wooden floor, his boots not leaving marks. Everything was intact. Everything was quiet. In a small hallway, he paused beside a mirror. His reflection wasn't him now, but him as a child. The boy smiled, held out a small wooden snowflake, and pressed it against the glass. The mirror shimmered and dimmed. When Calder turned, the door was behind him again. He stepped through, and he was back on the plateau. The door closed gently behind him and faded, not vanished, but returned to the snow. He stood for a moment, letting the silence nest in his shoulders. The snowglass key had turned into the wooden snowflake. He placed it in his pocket and walked on. Part 10, the archivist's lantern. The wind picked up as Calder descended the ridge, but it wasn't biting. It moved in wide, looping gusts like someone gently sweeping the sky. The snowflakes here fell in spirals rather than lines, circling him as he walked. The map in his mind was quiet now, but the direction he needed was steady and sure, as if it had been laid into his steps long ago. He came to a grove of saplings, all thin and white, their trunks smooth like bone or polished ivory. Nestled at their center was a tall stone structure shaped like an open book, its pages etched with frost runes that changed shape when he blinked. At its base stood a lantern. Unlike others in the hollow, this one did not flicker. It glowed with a constant unwavering light, pale and full, like moonlight drawn into a jar. This was the archivist's lantern, a relic of the Hollow used only by those who gathered not stories, but moments. Calder stepped closer. A soft hum grew in the air, and beside the lantern, a figure slowly faded into view, cloaked in snow-colored robes, their face hidden beneath a hood threaded with threads of light. The archivist. They did not speak aloud, but their presence poured into Calder's mind like warm tea. "You have carried many hours, Calder. Some still weigh. Some wish to be shared." The lantern pulsed. The archivist held out a hand, not asking, but offering. Calder reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the parchment from the Halloween chapel, the ribbon of blue from beneath the ice, and the wooden slick. He placed them one by one into the archivist's palm. The figure closed their hand gently around them. The lantern flared softly. Images shimmered in the air around them, slow memories replayed in mist, the candle in the clearing, the clock tree ticking once, the warm silence at the freestanding hearth. None of them said goodbye. None of them asked for return. They simply became light. The archivist gestured toward the lantern. "You may carry one with you. Only one. The rest will be kept." Calder hesitated. Each moment meant something different. Each had warmed a part of him he'd forgotten how to hold. But at last he reached out. He touched the memory of the future version of himself beside the hearth, and the lantern pulsed again. That moment curled inward, becoming a point of light no larger than a seed, and floated into Calder's chest, settling like a breath. The archivist bowed. And just like that, the grove returned to stillness. The lantern dimmed. The book-shaped stone closed its pages with a sound like falling snow. Calder turned, heart quiet, and followed the path as it unfolded once more, deeper into the winter. Part 11, The Village That Waits. The land leveled as Calder walked, and soon the trees parted again, not with grandeur, but with welcome. Before him lay a small village half covered in snow. Chimneys puffed slow curls of smoke. Icicles clung to eaves like silver teeth. The streets were empty, but every window glowed. The village looked both familiar and unknown. He passed a bakery with a crooked sign shaped like a teacup, a quiet windmill whose blades moved lazily in a wind he could not feel, a fountain at the center of the square, frozen mid-splash. Everything felt paused, as if the town had been waiting for him. He stepped into the square and the bell tower chimed, not sharply, but like an echo, soft and deep. A door opened. From the bakery, out stepped a woman wrapped in velvet and fur, her hair dusted with snowflakes that didn't melt. She smiled without surprise. "Calder," she said, as though finishing a thought they'd begun years ago. He tilted his head. "Do I know you?" "In a way," she said gently. "Or you did. Or you will." She beckoned him inside. The bakery was warm, with the scent of cinnamon, apples, and 100 forgotten yesterdays. He sat by the hearth while she moved quietly about, filling a kettle, slicing bread, humming the tune he remembered from the Halloween chapel bells. On the table before him she set a journal. It had his name on the cover. When he opened it, the pages were filled with writing. His writing, but not yet written. Snippets of thoughts, reflections, dreams, hours he hadn't lived, but would. The woman poured tea and sat across from him. "You've walked far," she said, "and gathered well. This village is not a place. It's a resting hour, one that never arrives until you've earned it." He turned another page. On it was a sketch of the archivist's lantern. "What happens here?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied, "unless you wish to remember." And suddenly he did. He remembered an afternoon with his father in a cabin at the edge of a frozen stream, whittling wooden animals, sipping something too hot. He remembered a letter never sent, a promise kept quietly, the soft weight of someone falling asleep on his shoulder beside a winter fire. The room was still. She offered him a pen. "You may add something, or rest." He set the pen down gently and closed the book. "I'll remember." She smiled again, and when he stepped back out into the snow, the village had grown fainter, but his steps were steadier. He didn't need the map. He knew the way now. Part 12, the Bridge of Quiet Names. The village faded into the snowfall behind Calder like a dream that had done its work and was content to drift away. The warmth of the bakery still clung to him, not as heat, but as hush. The land opened into a long valley, wide and white, the snow undisturbed. No trees, no sound, just sky above and silence below. At the far end of the valley stood a bridge. It stretched across a narrow ravine where a frozen river ran far beneath, locked in its motion by centuries of ice. The bridge was made of dark wood and soft stone, both worn smooth by time and footsteps. And carved into its railing were names, dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of names, etched gently into the surface like the snow itself had whispered them there. Some were full names, some were initials, some were just symbols, familiar only to those who had walked here before. Calder stepped onto the bridge. With each footstep, the sound of wind returned, not rushing but low like distant humming, the kind of sound you hear only when you're walking slowly through a place that remembers everyone who's passed. At the center of the bridge was a small alcove with a bench made of woven twigs and silver moss. Calder sat, gazing over the edge. Below, the frozen river glimmered faintly, as though it held light within its layers. He ran his fingers along the railing. One name stood out. His. Not his full name, not carved by his hand. Just a shape, a curve of lines, soft and certain, that he somehow knew had always belonged to him. Next to it, a smaller space remained empty. A carving knife lay tucked beneath the moss on the bench, cold but dry. Not left, placed. He picked it up. Above the empty space, he etched something, not his name again, but a symbol, a spiral made of snowflakes, a memory of a dream he hadn't quite lived. When he finished, the wind around him paused, and a bell rang. Far off, soft, like the sound of a snow lantern flickering back to life. He set the knife down gently and stood. As he crossed the second half of the bridge, snow began to fall in fine, glistening threads, each one catching the light from nowhere and turning it into something soft. He didn't look back. Bridges, after all, aren't meant for lingering. They're meant for crossing. Part 13, the library beneath the snow. Beyond the bridge, the landscape softened again, rolling white hills punctuated by the faint shadows of half-buried stones and sleeping trees. The sky above was the color of wool, thick and comforting, the kind of sky that holds snowfall in the corners of its breath. As Calder walked, the ground began to slope downward. At first gently, then more steeply, until he found himself standing before a pair of tall stone doors, nearly hidden by a drift of wind-packed snow. Carved into them was a sigil of a book with its pages open to the wind. He brushed the snow away and the doors opened, without sound, without resistance. Beyond them, a staircase led underground, and below that, a library. It stretched out in all directions, carved into the earth, lined with shelves made of pale birch and silent time. Candles floated mid-air, glowing with a cool blue light. The air smelled faintly of parchment and winter mint. Calder stepped inside. The books were unlike any he'd seen before. Some were bound in ice leather, others stitched together from pressed leaves and dream thread. None had titles on the spine, none asked to be opened. But they waited. He walked between the shelves until he found a reading nook tucked behind a curtain of icicle beads. A fire crackled in a floating hearth. A kettle whistled gently, though no one stirred it. And in the chair sat a figure, hooded, robed, and turning the pages of a book without touching it. The figure turned its head, sensing him, though Calder saw no face beneath the hood. A voice emerged, soft and layered like snow falling through pine. "You've come to read what you forgot." A book hovered down from a nearby shelf. It settled before him. He sat and the book opened. But there were no words. Just feelings drawn onto each page in faint color and warmth. Each page unfolded a scene from his past, not in detail, but in emotion, the warmth of a firelit room on a night he'd been too tired to speak, the sound of a loved one's laughter, echoing off a snowy rooftop, the sensation of holding someone's hand during a winter storm, not knowing where they were headed, but feeling no fear. Calder turned page after page, letting the story of his own quiet life drift around him. He did not cry, but he did feel full. When he closed the book, it folded in on itself and disappeared. The robed figure nodded. Nothing is ever lost, only unread. He stood and bowed. And as he made his way back toward the staircase, a new book took its place on the shelf, blank but humming, waiting for the rest of his story. Part 14, The Sleep of the First Snow. When Calder emerged from the underground library, the snow had changed once more. It fell slower now, large soft flakes like tufts of wool drifting down in lazy spirals. The world above was hushed, and the sky seemed closer, as though leaning in to listen. He stood for a moment, letting the snow settle into his shoulders, into his scarf, into the folds of his thoughts. The hollow no longer led him with urgency. It simply opened. Ahead, tucked between two snow-laden hills, was a small stone well. It steamed gently, though no fire or warmth touched it. Carved around its edge were the words, "Here sleeps the first snow." Calder approached. He peered into the well, not down but inward. The surface shimmered like glass, and within it he saw the beginning of winter, a sky too quiet, a field of untouched white, and a single flake drifting in slow silence. The water did not reflect his face. It reflected beginnings. His first snowfall, his first winter alone, his first time watching someone walk away, and the first time realizing they might return. Snow has a memory of its own. And here, beneath the sky that no longer spoke in hours, Calder felt it pressed gently into his chest. He sat beside the well, not to rest but to listen. From somewhere beyond the snow line, he heard laughter, the kind you hear when you're not quite awake. A bell rang once, not far, and a lantern in the distance flickered into being, even though no one was there to light it. Everything was gentle here. He took the snowflake token from his pocket, the one formed at the door without a frame, and held it above the well. It dissolved, but not into water. Into memory. The wind rose softly, carrying with it a warmth not of fire, but of recognition. He closed his eyes, and for a long time Calder slept, not because he was tired, but because something in the snow had curled its arms around him and said, "You may rest. This hour will hold." When he opened his eyes again, the sun was low. Not setting, just watching. And the hollow, faithful and slow, unfolded a new path beneath his feet. Part 15, The Sparrow Clock. The snow under Calder's boots now had a crispness to it, fresh but firm, like it had waited just long enough to be walked on. The sky overhead glowed with the color of early twilight, a pale lavender brushed with silver. The hollow had grown quieter still, not from emptiness but from knowing. Calder followed a new path that sloped gently downhill, lined with trees that looked like they'd been drawn in charcoal, soft, elegant, and slightly blurred by time. Their branches were bare but not brittle. They moved slightly as he passed, as if nodding. And then he saw it. A single post rising from the snow, crowned with a small birdhouse-like structure. It was the sparrow clock. Carved from weathered birch and hung with tiny wind chimes, the clock had no hands and no numbers. In place of a face was a softly painted sparrow, wings outstretched, feathers tinged with starlight. Beneath the clock, a sign read, "For the moments that flew too quickly." Calder stepped closer. A faint ticking began, but not from within the clock. It came from the air, the way leaves might tick when falling, or time might tick when waiting to be noticed. The sparrow's painted eye blinked once, and suddenly he was surrounded by birdsong. Not loud, not chaotic, just present. Soft notes filled the air, chirps, whistles, trills, each one tied to a forgotten second. A sparrow landing on his windowsill the day after his mother passed. The song of a night bird echoing through a frosted forest on a walk he never meant to take. A morning long ago, when a letter arrived with news that quietly changed the way he stood in the world. Each sound was a thread, not to pull on, but to touch. He sat down in the snow, letting the music of time circle around him like a warm scarf. And as he listened, the sparrow in the clock slowly unfolded its wooden wings. From beneath them fell a single feather, silver, weightless, and softly humming. It landed in the snow beside him. He picked it up carefully, It glowed faintly in his palm and pulsed once with a small, rhythmic warmth, a reminder not of what was lost, but of what had been beautiful, even in its brevity. He tucked the feather into the pages of the journal he still carried from the village, and when he stood, the sparrow's wings folded back into stillness. The ticking faded, but the music, gentle and distant, remained in the air like breath. The path ahead curved through a grove of frost flowers blooming in the evening light. And Calder, now carrying one more small moment, continued on. Part 16, The Lantern Orchard. The path ahead led Calder through a narrow glen where the snow deepened and softened beneath his feet. It was the sort of place that asked for quiet, not with rules but with presence. Even the trees, tall and spindly, leaned inward like listeners in a great hush. Then he saw them. Lanterns. Dozens of them, some hanging from the trees, others resting gently in the crooks of branches or nestled into the snow. They came in all shapes and materials, iron-framed with frosted glass, wood-bound with glowing paper sides, and a few that looked as if they were woven from starlight itself. This was the Lantern Orchard, a place whispered about in stories for those who remembered dreams more clearly than days. Calder stepped into the orchard and felt the change immediately. Each lantern held a moment. Some flickered brightly, others dimmed and glowed like breathing. A few pulsed slowly, gently, like hearts at rest. He walked beneath them carefully. One lantern glowed blue and cool. It reminded him of the first time he had been snowed in, alone but content, a kettle steaming and the windows covered in white. Another burned soft gold, full of the sound of pages turning and someone murmuring the last lines of a story before sleep. One lantern, small and hanging low, flickered the faintest pink. As he neared it, he smelled pine and cinnamon and felt the echo of laughter beside a fireplace, a memory not forgotten but buried under quieter years. He reached out. The lantern brightened slightly, and within it, he saw a younger version of himself dancing with someone he couldn't quite name, just swaying in a warm kitchen, socks sliding on wooden floors, snow tapping lightly at the window. He smiled, and the lantern dimmed again, satisfied. At the center of the orchard stood a tree older than the rest, thick-trunked and bowed with age. One lantern and one only hung from its lowest branch. It wasn't glowing. It was dark. Calder approached it slowly. As he neared, the snow-glass key from the hearth pocket warmed against his chest. He reached into his coat, withdrew the key, and gently touched it to the side of the dark lantern. The lantern flared to life. Soft silver light spilled from it, swirling upward like memory finally spoken aloud. And in that glow he saw himself, not as he had been or might be, but as he was now, standing in snow, wrapped in time, surrounded by light that asked nothing but to be noticed. A small plaque below the lantern read, "For the hour you finally arrived." He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the orchard glowed brighter, not just behind him, but ahead. Time had stopped hiding. And so he moved forward, the warmth of light now carried within him, quiet and clear. Part 17, The House with No Corners. As Calder left the lantern orchard, the snowfall lightened once more, becoming a dusting of fine crystal that shimmered in the half-light of the hollow's twilight. The path was narrow but steady, winding through small hills of snow like it had always known the way. And then he saw it. At the top of a gentle rise stood a house, quiet, round, and curious. No corners, no sharp edges. Its walls curved like the inside of a seashell, and its roof dipped softly in the middle as if bowing to the sky. It was known in whispered stories as the house with no corners, built not to keep time out, but to let it drift gently in. As Calder approached, the front door opened soundlessly. No one stood inside to greet him, yet the warmth from within spilled outward like an invitation. He stepped inside. The house was all curves and circles, furniture tucked into niches, shelves rounded at the edges, windows shaped like droplets of light. No clocks ticked here. No sharp words could be spoken. The air itself felt rounded. Each room spiraled into the next. One room was filled with cushions and quilts. Another held a low table with dozens of tiny teacups, each filled with a different memory steeping slowly in steam. He wandered gently, pausing at a hallway where the walls were painted with distant skies and imagined winters. And then at the center of the house he found a room that pulsed. It had no light source, but it glowed gently. On the floor lay a large circular rug stitched with a winding path, beginning nowhere, ending nowhere, looping infinitely. In the center of the rug was a chair, nothing grand, just welcoming. Calder sat. The rug beneath him felt warm, and for a moment he wasn't sure whether he was sitting in a room, a memory, or a moment outside of both. And then a voice, not his, whispered gently from behind the walls. Not all journeys are meant to end. Some are meant to soften. He felt his breath ease, his shoulders long held up by effort lowered, his heartbeat slowed to a rhythm that matched the room. He closed his eyes, and in that moment time forgot itself. He sat for what could have been minutes or years. And when he stood, he felt no older, only more whole. He passed back through the spiral rooms, each one glowing a little brighter now, and stepped again into the snowy air, carrying with him the stillness of soft turns and rooms without corners. Part 18, The Hour Nest. The world outside the house with no corners had grown deeper in hue. Not darker, just more saturated, as if the snow itself had steeped in dusk. The path now wound through rolling drifts, where the snow was packed thick and undisturbed. It muffled every step, and the air grew heavier with meaning rather than cold. Calder moved slowly. He didn't feel hurried anymore. The hollow had become something different, not a place he was passing through, but something he was becoming part of. At the top of the hill he saw what looked like a thicket, but as he neared, it revealed itself to be something stranger. A nest. Huge round, woven of old branches, frost silk, and time-bent twine. It sat cradled in the curve of the hill, filled not with eggs, but objects, lanterns, feathers, pages, cups, scarves, keys. Every item from every hour someone had tried to remember. This was the hour nest, a cradle for lost time, resting in the open sky. As Calder stepped inside the woven edge, the snow paused around him, and a figure rose from the far side of the nest. They were small and cloaked, their coat made of layered hours, one stitched from sunrise, another from dusk, another from snow-muffled laughter. They had no visible face, but their presence radiated gentle attention. They bowed. "You've carried much," they said, voice like wool brushing across skin. "And now you may return what you choose." Calder reached into his coat and withdrew. The silver feather from the sparrow clock. The glowing memory from the lantern in the orchard. The last warm breath from the house without corners, still lingering in his hands. He placed them gently in the nest. They didn't vanish. They nested, settling among the other tokens of soft things kept too long or never long enough. "You may take one with you," the figure said. Calder paused. Then he picked up a stone. Simple, smooth, cold. When he held it, he remembered something he'd never said aloud a moment from childhood, sitting on the steps during a snowfall, holding a stone just like it, and watching the sky. "I'm here," he had whispered then, not knowing who he was speaking to. Now the stone pulsed faintly. "You were heard," the figure said quietly, answering the unspoken question. "Every small thing echoes." Calder nodded. Snow began to fall again, not heavy but soft and slow, like sleep returning. He tucked the stone into his pocket, and as he turned to go, the nest behind him shimmered once and settled back into stillness. A keeper of quiet hours. A cradle for time. Part 19, The Staircase That Climbs the Moon. The snowfall had grown thinner now, more like whispers than flakes. Each one fell in its own time, drifting gently through air that felt almost translucent. The sky above Calder was the softest shade of winter blue, touched with silver and ribboned with light. It did not feel like dusk or dawn. It felt like the space between. Ahead, rising from a clearing dusted in fine frost, stood a staircase. It was impossibly tall and impossibly delicate, made of moonstone and frostwood. It spiraled gently upward into the clouds, not steep, not rushed, but steady. This was the staircase that climbs the moon. It was said to be built for only one traveler at a time. And tonight it waited for Calder. He approached without question. The first step felt like breath, the second like memory. By the third, he stopped counting. The stairs curved in a way that turned the world inward, like he was climbing not just upward but deeper into some understanding he hadn't yet named. There were no railings, no fear, just snow, sky, and silence. As he climbed, visions returned, not sharp images, but gentle echoes: the cabin with the fire that knew him, the girl who hummed in the bakery, the sparrow clock, the snow-glass key, the names on the bridge. They spiraled with him. The wind brushed past his coat in soft waves. About halfway up, he paused on a wider step. A bench had been carved into the side of the staircase, placed there for resting, not stopping. He sat, and the stars, which had seemed far away all winter, now drifted close enough to see their breath. One floated beside him. It pulsed once slowly. Inside it, a memory formed, so faint, so fragile. A snowflake falling into the open palm of someone waiting for him long ago. A face, a smile, a feeling of being found. The star blinked once more, then rose upward, and he followed. The top of the staircase was not a summit. It was a threshold. A thin bridge of light stretched from the topmost step to a platform shaped like a crescent moon, hovering in the clouds. Upon it sat a chair made of nightwood. He didn't sit. He simply stood at its edge, looking down, not to the ground, but to all the places he had been. The hollow, the cabin, the lake, the grove, the nest, the orchard. He carried them all with him now. And above him the moon opened, not as a light, but as a door. Behind it he could feel something vast and soft and waiting. Not an end. A pause? An hour of rest. The wind curled around him like a lullaby, and somewhere below a bell rang once, low, round, and kind. He closed his eyes and stepped forward. Part 20 the Almanac closes softly. There was no sound in the place beyond the moon. Not because it was empty, but because it was listening. Calder stood not in light and not in shadow, but in a soft in-between. A gentle hush that wrapped around his shoulders like an old quilt. There was no sky here, but there was warmth. No ground, but he did not fall. Time didn't stop. It curled up beside him like a dog settling into its bed. All around him were threads, fine, glowing, drifting through the stillness. Each one a moment. Not only his, everyone's. He reached out and touched one. It vibrated with the sound of laughter beside a winter window. He touched another. It pulsed with the weight of silence shared without discomfort. Here, in this unplace, he saw the shape of all the hours he had carried. Not separate, not scattered, but woven. The hollow was not behind him. It was within him. And then he saw it. A book. Bound in soft leather, stitched with starlight, its pages rimmed in frost. It floated gently before him, open to the very first page. There, in small handwriting, was his name. But not just his. It was a list. Names he'd passed. Names he'd forgotten. Names that hadn't spoken aloud in years. And below all of them, one line. The Snowkeeper is not the one who watches time, but the one who remembers to hold it kindly. The book closed. Not with finality, but with peace. A soft wind stirred the silence. Calder felt the weight of every quiet second settle into something lighter. He took a slow breath, then turned and walked back through the door of the moon. He awoke in the cabin in Whiteroot Hollow. The fire crackled, his cup of tea still warm. Snow drifted past the window like a curtain slowly being drawn open. He smiled. The hourglass heart still pulsed gently on the table. Its map now blank again. Or maybe full. Outside the woods waited. Not for adventure, but for company. Calder stood, wrapped his scarf once around his neck, and stepped outside. Not to find anything. Not to finish anything. Just to walk. To hold the hours gently. to be the Snowkeeper. The end. Thank you for wandering with us. You've just journeyed through the Snowkeeper's Almanac, a story of soft snow, remembered hours, and the quiet strength of carrying time gently. We hope Calder's path brought stillness to your night, warmth to your thoughts, and perhaps a dream or two. If this story helped you rest, you're welcome to return anytime. The hollow is always here, and the snow always remembers. Until next time, sleep well and keep your lanterns glowing. Good night.